All right, ready for a deep dive into some fascinating history.
Absolutely, let's do it.
We're talking modern Sweden from the 1930s to today. It's a journey full of surprises, I have to say. We're going to uncover how a nation known for its peace and social welfare actually went through some pretty wild times to get there.
Yeah, it's not all smooth sailing, that's for sure. But that's what makes it so interesting, right?
Exactly. And we've got some great material to work with. We're digging into a lecture from Stockholm University, full transcript, and even the slides. So it's like we're right there in the lecture hall with them, except, without the pressure of exams.
Much better setup, I'd say.
Right. So, get this, Sweden, despite its reputation for, well, being Sweden, actually had a pretty intense labor history back in the early 20th century. We're talking strikes, unrest, the whole works. It's not really the image that usually comes to mind.
Yeah, you don't often hear about Sweden and labor conflict in the same sentence, do you? But it was a real issue. The interesting part, though, is how they managed to transition from all that to this period of, well, relative labor peace. It's actually a key factor in their economic success story.
Okay, so let's talk turning points. The Saltsjöbaden Agreement of 1938. Sounds a little dry, I know, but stick with me, because this thing was huge. Basically, imagine all the big union leaders and the top dogs from the major companies all in one room, hammering out a deal. Instead of, constantly butting heads, they agreed to actually talk things through, to find common ground.
It was groundbreaking. That agreement, it led to decades of, well, as I said, relative labor peace, which meant businesses could plan for the future, the economy could grow. It was a win-win, really, and it set the stage for a lot of what came after.
And this is where we get into Folkhemmet, right? It roughly translates to the people's home, which sounds kind of quaint, but it was this powerful idea that took hold in the 1930s. Basically, it's the idea that everyone deserves a decent standard of living with a strong safety net if things go wrong, and that the government, actually has a responsibility to make that happen, not just talk about it, but actually do something.
And they did. We're talking about the 1930s here, the middle of the Great Depression, and Sweden is busy putting in place things like unemployment insurance, child welfare centers. They even made 2 weeks of paid vacation mandatory. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
That was radical stuff for the time.
It's like they had this vision, this long-term plan, even when the rest of the world was falling apart. They were laying the groundwork for what would become their famous welfare state.
Exactly. They saw the bigger picture.
Okay, but of course we can't talk about this period without mentioning the elephant in the room, World War II. Sweden stayed officially neutral, but it was a bit more complicated than that, right?
Right. There were some, let's say, controversial decisions made, like allowing German troops to move through their territory. It's something historians still debate today.
It's a reminder that even countries known for peace and neutrality, sometimes they face these impossible choices when the world goes crazy.
Absolutely. No easy answers in those situations.
And here's a little historical tidbit I found interesting. King Gustav V, who was in power at the time, he had some, shall we say, interesting connections. So while Europe's picking up the pieces after World War II, Sweden's economy is taking off like a rocket. Talk about good timing, eh?
Yeah, that post-war boom was essential, really. Gave them the resources, the breathing room to really build out those social programs they'd started in the 30s.
Because they had the money to do it, right?
Exactly. When the economy's doing well, it's like this rising tide that lifts all boats. And they were smart about it, used that momentum to strengthen their social safety net.
So more Folkhemmet in action. What were some of the big things they tackled during this boom time?
Well, pensions got a major boost, for one. They expanded the system, made sure retirees were taken care of. Then there was the housing situation, a big issue after the war. They came up with this ambitious plan, the Million Program.
Million Program. Sounds massive.
It was, aiming to build 1 million new homes across the country in just 10 years. 1 million. Talk about ambitious.
Wow, that's a lot of apartments and houses. Did they actually manage to pull it off?
They did, yeah. Built 1 million homes, though of course it wasn't perfect. Some critics said they focused too much on quantity, not enough on quality. And the architectural style, while modern for the time, hasn't aged all that well in some cases.
So what was once cutting edge is now kind of, well, dated, I get it.
Yeah, kind of. But still, it had a huge impact on Sweden, solved a major housing crisis, and changed the face of their cities.
And speaking of cities, I remember those slides from the lecture. They showed this Stockholm suburb, Vällingby. It was designed in the 50s as, like, the ideal modern community.
Oh yeah, Vällingby. It's like a time capsule of mid-century modernism. All these sleek apartment buildings, a big shopping center, lots of green space. Back then, it was the future.
It's funny how that happens, isn't it? What's seen as the height of modernity one decade becomes a historical artifact the next.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it makes you think, what will our Wellenby be? What are we building today that future generations will look back on with that same mix of fascination? And what were they thinking?
That's a good question. Like, what will be the defining features of our era, good and bad? Makes you think. But for Sweden, the 70s brought a whole new set of challenges and changes. So we're stepping into the 1970s now, a period of significant shifts, both within Sweden and globally. Remember we were talking about the Swedish model, that unique blend of labor peace and social welfare? Well, even the most established models have to adapt to changing times.
That's right. The 1970s saw the rise of new social movements, challenging traditional norms and pushing for greater equality, particularly gender equality.
And Sweden took some pretty groundbreaking steps in that direction, didn't they? I mean, 1974, they introduced 12 months of paid parental leave, and not just for mothers, but with a big emphasis on fathers taking their share, too. That's unheard of, even today in many parts of the world.
It was a radical policy for its time, reflecting a shifting understanding of gender roles and the importance of shared responsibility within families. It's fascinating to see how social policy can be a catalyst for cultural change.
It makes you wonder, what will be the groundbreaking social policies of our time? What will future generations look back on as a major turning point in how we live and interact with each other? But I'm getting ahead of myself. The 70s weren't all about social progress. The global energy crisis hit Sweden hard, leading to economic challenges and sparking debates about the long-term sustainability of their generous social programs.
Exactly. These economic realities forced Sweden, like many other nations, to reevaluate its priorities and make some tough choices. It also created an opening for new political ideas and movements to gain traction.
Like the environmental movement, which was gaining momentum globally, but found a particularly strong foothold in Sweden, people started questioning the environmental impact of unchecked economic growth, a conversation that continues to resonate deeply today. And then, in 1986, Sweden experienced a national tragedy that sent shockwaves through the country and beyond, the assassination of Prime Minister Olof Palme.
Palme was a towering figure, both admired and controversial, but his assassination marked a profound moment in Swedish history, one that continues to be analyzed and debated even today.
It's a stark reminder that even in nations known for their peace and stability, political violence can shatter those illusions in an instant. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. From labor conflicts to the rise of the welfare state, from economic booms to social change and political tragedy. But our deep dive through modern Swedish history isn't over yet. Up next, we'll explore how Sweden navigated the complexities of globalization, the rise of the internet, and the new challenges facing them today. Stay tuned. So there you have it, a glimpse into the fascinating and complex journey of modern Sweden, from its turbulent beginnings to its innovative present. And while we focus on the major events and turning points, remember this is just the tip of the iceberg. Sweden's history is filled with countless stories, triumphs, and struggles that continue to shape the country today. If you're eager to learn more, I encourage you to dive deeper into the resources we've discussed, explore the many books and articles available, and even consider a visit to Sweden itself. It's a nation with a rich history and a vibrant present waiting to be discovered. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.